It's really a pleasure to be here. This is really, I have to tell you, I love working in this community. It's very supportive. I think people who get into this work are really service oriented. They are inspired to support students and give them opportunities. I hope that, like Beck, that you feel welcome here, and it's good to see some familiar, some familiar faces. Before I'm going to just go ahead and start talking while you get the slides up, Chris. If you need help from us, though, do let us know. So before we get into how to make your website or your application inclusive, let's first cover some of the practical information to include on your website and in your application. And just by the way, this content, is also supported and or supplied in the handbook that we'll be sending you. In addition to the points that I listed on the slide, some tips are to keep your application deadline the same each year, so you don't have to change the web content. Typically, people kind of go for like beginning of February. Check with HR on whether you will be paying your students with a stipend or as a paid employee, and that will impact the information that you can collect and use in the selection of the students, but you might want to check with HR on that as well. When housing and travel are not paid, can you go to the next slide, please? The REUs have been giving a lump sum for costs. So for example, this past summer, several REUs went virtual, completely virtual. And since the students were bearing the cost that normally the REU would host, like lodging and travel, and now the students were paying for lodging and so on, many REUs gave the students a lump sum, maybe $2,000 or something like that, that they could then use for rent and internet access, that kind of thing. Next slide, please. I guess that, oh, actually, can you go back one? I'm sorry, I think I was jumping ahead. So here is the, the information that you really need to include on here, just to underline that students must have a remaining semester, well, almost always, unless it's a student from a very underrepresented group. Sometimes NSF will make an exception. So you need to ask your program officer if you can make an exception. Same for having a repeat student who has done an REU before. You need to ask for permission. So you want to include all of these things on your website so that people can see right away, like, how much money will I make? Is it virtual? If you can tell that kind of thing. Next slide, please. Right, and so typically the information that we request in applications, they're very familiar to you. It's unofficial transcripts, technical skills, experience, letters of recommendation, things like that. And the more I learn about these, the more I discover that they all have embedded systemic issues of privilege, racism, disparity built in. Just for example, the GPA alone, which often people will sort their applications by GPA. Well, if you're a student who has the resources, you can put a lot of time into studying. On the other hand, if you are working 25 or 30 hours a week in order to pay your rent or support somebody in your family, you don't have as much. So the GPA itself is an indicator, or it often reflects to some extent the privilege. Letters of recommendation are falling out of favor, and typically REUs ask for 2 letters of recommendation. However, this puts a really big burden on particularly professors who have maybe a lot of students, like if they're at a minority serving institution or MSI, there may be just one or two people teaching geosciences at that school. So they end up writing all these letters. So Beck made this suggestion in the asterisk: request these letters only after you've narrowed down to the top contenders, and don't make it a requirement for them to have their application complete. But a better approach might be to go with contact information for recommenders. You'll see why in the next slide. So lots of research has been coming out in the last, well, it looks like at least 15 years, looking at letters of recommendation written about men and about women and other groups. And what they find is generally that the letters written about women are more informal. They don't provide enough information. They don't talk as much about accomplishments. They're more inclined to describe the personality, and it tends to be stereotyping language like, please, pleasant, helpful, team player for women, and men get more commonly standout adjectives like potential, focused, brilliant. And it's both men and women who write these letters. There's not a difference noticeable. And then the same sort of thing is found with names that are more Anglo versus from other languages and ethnicities. So you'll see in that graph, which is a bit blurry, I apologize, that you'll see like there are way more doubt raisers used in letters about women, for example, and more grindstone language, which would be like, she works very hard. So this is really valuable for not only REUs, also, as you imagine, graduate school, promoting hiring, etc. Next slide, please. So it's likely that your proposal to NSF outlined a plan to reach and target a certain demographic of the population. Maybe it's community college students or tribal students, a blend. So it's important to know that the application and selection processes are as important as the recruiting processes, and creating a safe, kind, supportive environment is also key. So in any of this, please feel free to ask the REU community for help. You can put out questions on the REU listserv. So this particular workshop is on really the application. It ties in closely to selection. We will have a seminar in January on selecting. It's also a really interesting, really important bottleneck in the reach for diversity is how we create our applications and how we select. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to do a little small group share, and in a minute, Beck will send us off into small groups of 3 or so. And what we'd like for you to do is to share with each other just briefly where you are at with your own REU application, if you have one, and also and what you're looking for, and what you think the strengths and weaknesses of your application might be at this point with respect to recruiting students who are commonly underrepresented in your discipline. So go ahead, Beck, and we'll come back in 5 minutes and just see what we found out.
Hi, Chris, do you want to join a breakout room?
I think
lower 70s today. In the, first week in November. It's
It'll
crazy.
be snowing tomorrow though, right?
I
Yeah, in
think
a
it's
few days.
Saturday.
I think it's supposed to snow. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Val, I'm going to go ahead and share again.
Oh, okay. So wait, we were going to do the chat on the responses first,
Okay, that's fine.
I think. Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you
Or
go
do we
ahead and
want to go
share,
back?
Chris? And for
Okay.
any of you who would like to share the strengths or weaknesses that you discussed or that became interesting for you, feel free to pop them in the chat so we can all see them.
And also what you're, where, if you want to put where you're at with the process or what you might be looking for. And let's say you're just starting and you haven't developed your application yet, and you just get your name up so that the rest of us can help out if we can.
Okay, are we good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So go ahead and like if you want to add into the chat. In my group, there was one person who's just starting, just got their award, and the other one is hoping to make her application more inclusive by potentially reducing the number of letters of recommendation and maybe considering having that be only required once the pool has been reduced in number. And it looks like Andrew Rice says, we had some concerns about recruiting in rural areas of our states without the in-person connections. Yeah, that's a good one. Beck is a good source for that one. Colin, just starting on our application, and good that you're here. Okay, so please go ahead if you feel like typing more. And in the meantime, we'll move to the next slide and Chris is going to take over.
Yeah, I will. And, I do want to say for everyone too that, when you get into this and thinking about how to make your program accessible and how to make your recruitment and selection materials inclusive, it can feel really overwhelming at first. So pick something to do. Don't try to do it all at once. Just try to do something and then build on that year after year. Pick things that are kind of the low hanging fruit that you can feel successful with doing, and then share that out with your network, and then listen for what everybody else is doing too, and get advice from them. So don't feel like you have to try it all at once, because that would really make you feel like you're not being as successful as you should.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about your promotion and recruitment materials. And by these, a lot of people use websites and videos and flyers and images, maybe some text-based emails. And so what we're really trying to do here is to create a sense of belonging for the students who are applying for these. You're trying to attract those students through what you're promoting. And through that, you're trying to help them see that they fit, that this is something that they can do and that they belong doing this, right? So as examples, we look at some of the images, and in a lot of my other presentations, I always talk about, if you did a Google search for geology, just and looked at the images that the Google search will provide, you will often see a lot of images like the one in the middle. And these images are often portrayed on geology department websites, all around the country. And the issue with it is that it's very oftentimes very ableist, very white, very male dominant. And so when you're thinking about the types of images that you're portraying, also think about what it's saying to the students you're trying to attract. If you're not portraying images that represent diversity in both people and activities, then you're obviously probably marginalizing a part of the population that the underrepresented population that you're trying to really attract to your program. So think about what it is you're portraying. This is an example at UMass, their Coastal Research and Environmental Science and Technology. We just show this as an example, as something that, let's think about the meaning of what is presented here. You have on the top header image, you show kind of an urban / natural environment, different types of environments for students to participate in, to kind of feel at home with. At the bottom, you see diverse students working. You've got a lab setting, you've got more of an outdoor setting, you've got diversity that's represented in that. So think about the different types of student population, the different types of interdisciplinarity in terms of the science and the activities that you're going to be doing as a way of representing your REU program. But be careful when you're doing that. Don't show diversity when you don't really have it. The biggest issue is, and this is really a deeper issue, that if you haven't had a lot of diversity, don't go out on the internet looking for stock photos that completely misrepresent what your program does. So like the image there in the middle, when you say, you know what, we're going to take you out to this beautiful location, this boardwalk and this island, and that's where you're going to do your work. And then you see the reality image on the right. You know, don't show images that they're never going to see during your program. And so the photo on the far right there too, you see that it's not very diverse at all. You've got some gender diversity, but that's about it. And also keep in mind too that you can attract a lot of students by the type of staff that you have. So you might want to talk about the staff diversity that you have. And if you don't have a lot of diversity in your staff, talk about how you're overcoming that. You know, are you bringing in mentors that would support the students from underrepresented populations, things like that. So don't misrepresent your program by the types of images that you're showing. For the accessibility piece, keep in mind that small efforts can make a huge difference. This is what I was talking about earlier. Find something and focus on that. Don't try to focus on all of it at once. But for your website, for your images, for the text that you might be sharing out, make sure that you're using large text and high contrast on your websites in your promotional materials. Avoid red and green text. There's also some other colors, but to support students who have color blindness, color vision deficiencies, make sure that you check that. There is a paper that Declan DePore and I wrote a couple of years ago on color blindness. It came out through AGU's or GSA. I don't remember where it came out. If you're interested in reading it, let me know. I'll send it to you. But it talks about all the differences and the different types of color vision deficiencies. Provide alt text for screen readers on your figures and on your images. Keep in mind that someone who has a visual disability, images don't help them. They can't see the images if there are no alt tags associated with those images or those figures. So make sure that you provide alt tags for images, for figures, and provide a rich description of those. Don't just kind of give some lame description of what the image is actually saying. Provide rich description for those. Again, if that's something that you're interested in learning how to do more, let me know and I can help you with that. Providing closed captioning, like you see here, Google Slides is perfect for providing closed captioning. It's not always perfect, but it's pretty good. And something else that the IAGD is working on improving ourselves is providing audio descriptions for your videos. So if any of you have ever seen this, this is for someone who is blind and can watch videos just like everyone else. They're listening to, say you're listening to my voice right now, but then there's an audio description, much like a voice. It's a softer voice that describes what the video is showing. So do a quick Google search for that. It's pretty neat to see it. And you can certainly reach out to the IAGD for help on getting those resources. And then use headings to enable navigating using your keystrokes. So not everybody can use a mouse when navigating a website or even a Word document. Make sure you're using headings to enable that navigation. A couple of resources here for web content accessibility guidelines. You can do a Google search for that exactly, and it'll bring up the guidelines. Or you can contact us at the IAGD through that email address or through Twitter and Facebook, and we can put you in contact with that community too. So think about the language that you're conveying in your website. Not only your website, any emails or anything that you're doing to promote your program. What is the language you're using and what does that language convey? These are two examples here, and we'll talk about these. So first example, we strive to create an environment of full inclusion. What does that really mean? I want you all to think about this. What does this really mean? And the second one, our organization values diversity and aims to create an equitable, inclusive, and kind work environment. Does this really tell us anything? I mean, you know, our little monster student here thinks that this is reassuring, and sure, it is reassuring to see that you're focused on inclusion and diversity and equitability and such. And so it is good to say these things, but I really caution you not to just focus on providing these blanket statements. So this is something that I've been doing a lot. A lot of folks are really wanting the IAG to promote job postings. And as a quick example here, I always send the job posting back to whoever sends it to me because they always provide the, you know, equal opportunity employer BS language at the bottom of these job postings. And I always tell them, I'm like, yeah, that's really great. But what are you truly going to do for somebody who applies for this position and needs accommodations during an interview or needs accommodations when they actually get a job and they have to work day in and day out? So what is it that you're going to do? What kinds of things is your institution prepared to do to support these individuals? So anything that you can show through images, through text, through descriptions that you are prepared to do the work. Talk about mentors and student training that creates a safe environment so that everybody, all the staff and the staff and students that get accepted to this, they have to go through implicit bias training or harassment prevention, that you probably sign a contract of value to diversity and inclusion. Highlight gender neutral bathrooms and wheelchair accessible facilities. Maybe you don't, maybe you talk specifically about the fact that you're not requiring the full cost to be paid up front. This is going to really support people who have who might not have the financial resources that other students might have. Offer opportunities to work with parents by providing off-campus housing. Maybe you have an opportunity to provide daycare or something like that, right? So keep in mind, statements are really easy. Everybody can provide a statement, but it's backing that statement up with actual action that is really what drives home the message that you're trying to be inclusive. All right, so in your chat, we want you to think about these. We have 3 statements here that we want you to think about for your specific REU program. If someone with these identities clicks on your website, what is it that they're going to be looking for? What might you? So imagine yourself being a student parent of a young child. Imagine you're a student with a young child at home. In the chat, write what you might be looking for on an REU website, or feel free to unmute and speak. So just take a minute, think about that. Looks like we're getting some good responses there. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one. Imagine that you have a visual disability, and not just that you're wearing glasses, but that you have low vision or you might be blind. What might you be looking for on an REU website? Okay. It's like our ideas have slowed down a little bit there. If this is an area that you think you need some help with, please reach out to me. And we'll certainly talk more about this. Okay. All right. I'm going to move on to the third one here. Now, imagine being transgendered and of mixed race. What might you be looking to see on an REU application or website? So the interesting thing here is that I've provided two identities. You know, every single student coming to you will have the intersectionality of multiple identities, whether it be disability, race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, age, parental status. Maybe they're not parents of young children, but they might be children that are taking care of elderly parents. We can all sit down and write what our identities are, and I guarantee you all of us have more than one. How are we supporting them? But some of our more defined identities, like being transgendered or Black or any other underrepresented community, a community that's commonly underrepresented in the geosciences, it gets really difficult to navigate, you know, because a lot of our students, we try to normalize our students by ability, by their race, their gender, right? What is normal? There is no more normal, especially as it comes to when it comes to ability. So the more that we can do to be diverse and inclusive is going to support more students than we ever thought possible. So Beck and Val, do we want to talk about some of those comments?
I would love you to offer some suggestions on making your website more accessible for somebody who is visually impaired.
Yep. So the biggest things that you've got to think about are the e-accessibility guidelines. So I'm sure at every one of you, at all of your institutions, you're probably hearing from IT on the e-accessibility guidelines of not only your websites, but whatever learning platform you're using, whether it's Blackboard or we use Canvas here at UC or anything like that, that it's all the same thing. It's all about alt tags. It's all about, you know, moving away from PDFs because PDFs are not always screen readable. It's about using the opportunity to use high contrast text and backgrounds, or the opportunity to click those off and on. Using both audio and visual information. So if you're using a video, make sure it's captioned with audio descriptions. You're going to be able to support all students in each of those. Those are the big ones. Those are really the big ones. And, you know, don't forget to leave a statement someplace that says, look, if you need an accommodation of any kind that is not supported in something that we've provided, please contact us. Make sure you leave the door open for students to reach out to you.
I'd also add that it's really helpful to talk to the professionals on your campus who know how to do these things. So most campuses are conscious of how you deal with a transgender student in terms of what's available for them on campus. The accessibility support services can tell you who you can contact to make sure rooms are accessible. So being aware of who those people are so that you have resources to reach out to when a student does say, I need something. This community has also been really helpful in many of those scenarios for us.
Yeah. Anyone want to share any other questions that you have about any of these three examples?
I had a question. So universities are kind of insulated in a sense that you can provide a welcoming environment, but how do you handle the community outside of the university that may not be safe or unwelcoming to marginalized individuals from marginalized identities?
No, that's a really great question. Does anybody have any response to that of something that they've tried?
One piece of advice that we will give students often is just for safety, really, is to go out in pairs, particularly if it's at nighttime. People think Boulder is super safe, and relatively speaking, it is safe, but it's not that safe too. So that might be a way to, you might, if the environment doesn't feel that welcoming, I mean, it's hard to call it out in some ways, but perhaps that might be one way, is to say, like, take care of each other, look out for each other. You might not always feel welcome in every part of the environment outside of our milieu here. So help your group to feel safe. And I don't know if that's maybe one idea.
Yeah, there's,
We always talk,
keeping,
oh, sorry, guys.
go ahead, Beck.
We always talk with our students about harassment, what it is, and what they can expect from us in terms of protection as well. So absolutely that we're going to go into fight for them. So if they come into a scenario where they're uncomfortable or they're unsafe, first get themselves out of it and then call us and talk to us. I think as REU leaders, we have a lot of power to step in and help diffuse situations. I know in various times, members of my team have called Target and complained about security guards following people around, have helped interface with police to make hate crime complaints and those sort of things. Hopefully you never have to deal with, but being willing to step up and support the students and telling them right from the start that you're willing to do that is really helpful.
Nice.
Yeah. So keep in mind too, that the more information that you can provide your students when you've accepted them, I don't know that I would throw this all up on your website, right? You don't want to promote that there might be a location you take them that's not safe, but once you do get them together, the more information you can provide them and the helpful tips like you've just heard is going to really support that. So make sure you be really upfront and transparent with them and try to help them help themselves.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks. Okay, so as Beck wrote in the chat that it's one thing that she's done probably with Alicia is to have a form rather than essay questions. In some cases, in the form have shorter answer and then see what you like, and then perhaps dig in more with the students that you are more interested in. But essay questions can be super, super helpful, particularly if you're unable to ask directly about demographics or to use that information in selecting students, which will depend on your institution and the current state of the law, which seems to be changing year to year. And it's a great way to learn more about the student than just their GPA and what courses they took. So for example, are they going to be a good team member? Will they care about others? What inspires them? And at the same time, students can learn a lot about the program by the very questions that you ask. Next slide, please. So for example, the usual question of something like write about your career goals and how this REU will help you succeed in reaching them. Some people really like this. They feel like they get enough out of it. It doesn't show a high degree of interest in the student as an individual. It sort of alludes to how they might fit into the program. It doesn't on its own show a concern for character, the students' passions, their challenges, or give recognition of how their unique background can contribute to the cohort and program. Next slide. So some PIs and REU PIs have been surprised at the wonderful and personal information that students have offered up with the first question. Just a simple question: what unique qualities and characteristics will you bring to our program? And I think Jenna in my breakout group said she had a similar question of like, what assets do you bring to the program? And apparently people will open up about all kinds of things that really do show a diverse, experience. The second question, which is pretty long, is used in I think it's wording from the SOARS program, a diversity focused internship. I think Khadija is maybe on this call, the lead of that. And so this is asking how students will contribute to the mission. And it can be of diversity and broadening participation. It can be surprisingly informative. So I used this question in a program and consider in the same pool of applicants, let's say we're looking for people who are sensitive to disparity in
We're
the
losing you a little bit, Val.
community, and that
Val, we have lost being able to hear
diversity.
you.
Her
Can you hear us, Val?
who
I think we've lost Val. I think what she's saying is that it gives the
To-
students themselves the opportunity to bring their own culture and identity and heritage and what's important to them as people into the essays.
We'll move on.
Yeah, I did want to also be aware of the privilege that's embedded in some selection criteria. Sometimes you ask for what extracurricular activities somebody might be involved in or what volunteer work do they do. And for some students, that's a challenge if they're working for 40 hours a week in order to support themselves or their families while also studying. That shows huge contributions of time management and dedication and commitment that may be real assets to your program, but may result in lower GPAs or less ability to have those sort of things on their application. So a question like, just a simple question, do you work outside of school? If so, where do you work and how many hours a week will help you to be able to weigh out perhaps a student who's working 40 hours a week and may on paper look a little bit less strong than one that's able to concentrate completely on their studies. Or describe an experience of yours from outside of school that can help you succeed in this REU. One of the things that often puts students off is these essay questions, especially for students who English is not their first language. So sometimes having a couple of paragraph length, shorter answer questions, rather than asking for one or two really long essays is a way to help overcome that barrier of writing essays.